Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for August 10th, 2026. Today, we're going to take a look at what is there to track in the Atlantic, with obviously our two disturbances in the MDR, one of them which is becoming more and more likely to develop this upcoming week, but we also have a third disturbance as well, which has also popped up. Absolutely a sign, in my opinion, of August beginning to work its magic in the Atlantic, and things are really beginning to sprout to life. And we also have Invest 93C, which we are still tracking in the Pacific, as it is becoming more and more likely that it could be a potential threat to Hawaii. And there's still lots of uncertainty over the next few days about what exactly is going to happen, but I'm thinking Hawaii is going to have to start paying very close attention to what happens with 93C, and I'll show you all the model guidance and everything you need to know. So, with that being said, let's get started with the many things we obviously have on today's menu. First off, the National Hurricane Center Bulletin, where you can see 3 disturbances are now present in the Atlantic. The first one, and probably the most prominent one that we're going to be tracking right now, not yet to be invested, but probably is only going to be a matter of time before this AOI here gets invested, is up to a 60% chance now of development in the next 7 days, 20% in the next 48 hours, but that too is probably going to go up. We obviously have our second wave as well. This one is looking less and less likely that it's going to develop. All of the models have kind of trended away from this system here, including the GFS. And even though this wave has recon, which was scheduled for it, I think more than likely it is probably going to get canceled, and we really won't have to worry much about this wave, except maybe for some shower and thunderstorm activity for the islands as this gets close. And obviously, I hope you guys get the rain down here in the islands, because as I've been saying and we've been talking about, the Caribbean in general has been in a pretty significant drought for quite a bit of time. And obviously a lot of that has to do with El Nino. I mean, almost everything has to do with the El Nino, because of very strong wind shear choking off these tropical waves, especially once they enter the Caribbean. So you don't really have enough aggressive waves to bring rain. So that creates drought conditions when you are in a deficit of rain. Pretty obvious, I'm pretty sure. But beyond that, another area that the National Hurricane Center decided to tag today, an area in the subtropics. And this did formerly, about 1 or 2 weeks ago, if you recall, actually have some model support and showing development off the southeast coast. The GFS had a hurricane developing off the Carolinas coast with this disturbance here in the first week of August, but obviously the first week of August is come and gone, and we didn't have a hurricane, right? But now the remnant energy is racing on off to the east in the subtropics, and there's a low chance that we might see this develop, but it is only at a 10% chance right now. The main focus in terms of areas that we are watching to develop remains to be this eastern Atlantic wave. The Pacific right now also, gleaming, glittering and beaming with activity right now. 3 AOIs there as well, so we're now starting to match the Pacific for their activity. One of them not very likely. The second one more likely to develop, 60%, and then we have the most likely to develop right now, Invest 93C. This is continuing to look like an interesting storm for Hawaii, and the models are trending more and more towards the fact that we might get a direct hit on the island chain from whatever develops from 93C. There's still quite a bit of uncertainty, especially because of the setup that 93C is coming from. It's coming from being embedded within the intertropical convergence zone here in the Pacific, so a lot of the models are very unsure about how exactly the storm is going to consolidate, but right now, most of them are showing this heading in the general direction of Hawaii, so we're going to really have to start paying attention here in Hawaii over the next few days. And you know how I am when it comes to these Hawaii threats. I've said it many times before. There always tends to be uncertainty, and you can never say for sure, because usually we don't get threats to Hawaii to verify, but in a year like this year, I guess you can't completely count it out. So we will also be watching Invest 93C very closely. Here's a satellite shot of the Atlantic right now. And definitely in the MDR, well, the MDR is technically the Eastern Atlantic because, the Western Atlantic would be the Caribbean and the Gulf and Southeast coast and whatnot. But in the Eastern Atlantic here out in the MDR, our waves are definitely becoming better organized today. A special emphasis on this eastern wave where you can see we actually have quite a bit of decent convective activity blowing up right now. Probably the deepest convection I've seen of a wave so far, after it's moved off the coast of Africa. So if there's already a positive sign for whatever tropical wave here in the Eastern Atlantic, is the fact that it is producing pretty decent convection right now. And then you could also see here, off the East Coast, moving to the east in the subtropics, our other disturbance as well, also producing some convection right now, but it's probably moving a little bit too quickly and just doesn't seem like much is consolidating right now. But it is an interesting system nonetheless. And you never know with these subtropical systems. Sometimes they do sneak up on us. It's happened in years in the past, and maybe this one here will try to do the same. Although, once again, we are still looking at mainly a low chance of development right now. Zooming in, though, on the MDR to show you how our waves are doing right now, and kind of emphasizes this eastern wave here is doing pretty decently. And this western wave as well is not doing so badly, but the thing is, it's just going to continue to move on off to the west and probably not have enough time to consolidate before it ends up running into the buzzsaw of the wind shear due to the El Nino, which is obviously cutting across the Caribbean. And then as well to the north, you see quite a bit of Saharan air, and that's still going to be a factor, and definitely still keeping things kind of, capped in the MDR, especially, from things going crazy, and it might actually present itself as a problem for this eastern wave here over the next few days, especially if this is not able to consolidate properly immediately within the next few days before it starts to move on off to the west. And I'll talk to you why that is in just a little bit. But interestingly enough, you can actually see on this eastern wave as well a decent bit of spin visible on the satellite. So there's definitely probably some sort of mid-level circulation building. Not sure about a low-level circulation just yet, but if this is going to develop, then maybe there might be one already in the works. But also an interesting thing too, I should point out, definitely good convective activity, and that's noticeable by the quite decent bit of lightning here that is showing up on satellite. So whenever you have lightning and deep convection, that usually means that something is bubbling here. And speaking of the spin, the vorticity, here's how it looks like on the vorticity map. Had to segue some way, somehow. But there's definitely some decent spin here in the Eastern Atlantic, especially with our eastern wave here. Also looking more concentrated than our western wave, that is for sure. But both waves here have decent spin, but this western one is, again, kind of elongated right now, and it's just going to briskly move on off to the west. But again, though, as I said before, it's probably going to bring some shower and thunderstorm activity to the Caribbean islands, and obviously you guys would definitely appreciate that. But development of this wave is not looking as likely. Although I'd imagine, especially if we were in a different year, like a La Nina, or, in general, just a much more favorable year for the Atlantic, I would imagine that, honestly, both of these waves here could have developed. But in the very least, though, we will probably still get one, and it'll be this eastern wave here where there is a decent amount of vorticity, and definitely more concentrated as well, which is very important because with tropical cyclones, in order for them to be able to strengthen, you need vorticity to concentrate and become circular over one area so you can get a proper low-level circulation to develop. So definitely a sign that our eastern wave is probably more primed to be able to develop here in the MDR. And then there's also a speck of vorticity here just to the north of Bermuda associated with our other disturbance that the National Hurricane Center has mentioned. But as you can see, the vorticity is very weak, so not really expecting too much out of that area. So with that being said, let's take a look at what the models show for today, starting off with the GFS. And let's see what it shows on the 12Z run, which is now out. And you can see over time here, over the next 2 or 3 days, our eastern wave gradually begins to consolidate, definitely develops a pretty decent low-level circulation, probably by the time we get to the end of the week. And then our western wave doesn't look too bad as well. It tries to consolidate a little bit, but as you can see, as I've been saying, this just quickly moves on off to the west, kind of gets caught up in the trades here, and ends up, disintegrating as this moves into the Caribbean. And then obviously once this is in the Caribbean, this is just going to get itself completely sheared off, and won't stand a chance at all in terms of being able to see any development. With the eastern wave, though, you do notice, interestingly enough, on the 12Z run today, the GFS does initially try to develop it, but then it kind of becomes a little bit wimpy here, and almost seemingly begins to open back up into an open trough, and then this moves into the Caribbean, and obviously completely disintegrates. And as I mentioned before, probably that's a sign of the fact that maybe the model this run is starting to hint at more of the dry air here in the Atlantic, potentially keeping a lid on this wave as well. So let's actually see whether or not that happens on this run. And you can see that is definitely an issue here. There's initial development that occurs on the GFS roughly around 2 or 3 days out. Then as this gradually begins to move on off to the west-northwest, the 12Z run hints at the fact that the dry air probably does choke this system off, and because of that, it ends up kind of, disintegrating and opening up into a wave before it even reaches the Caribbean. So the overall state here of the atmosphere in the MDR is still very, very fragile. And I've mentioned over the last few days that any wave that does develop would really have to try its best to ride as low as possible, and still retain a lot of moisture from the ITCZ, because you can see here initially that is what happens. The wave moves off, or definitely came off at a pretty low latitude, and at least in order for it to be able to initially develop, the wave receives quite a bit of moisture, and a zap of energy from the intertropical convergence zone here in the southern Atlantic, and obviously displaced north enough away from the Saharan air and all of the dry air in the central and northern MDR, but eventually it gets to it on today's run and ends up choking it off. And especially, if that happens before, we get to the Caribbean here, and let me switch you to the wind shear. Obviously once this gets to the northwestern MDR and near the Caribbean, this is just going to completely, get killed off from the tut that we have, which will obviously shear it to death. So in the end, the GFS on this run not really doing much with this wave here. But let's see what the other models show, like the European. The 6Z run still does develop something, though. So maybe the GFS is kind of wavering back and forth between different solutions here. But, something still does develop. To be fair, going back to the GFS here, something still does develop, although it does start off a little bit flimsy. And the European, at least on the 6Z run, still showed development of the storm. Let's see what the 12Z run shows. Maybe if that holds, and maybe the GFS might be doing something, and having a one model run blip. We will see, but the models still show development right now. So I'd still anticipate that more than likely within this week here, we probably will get our next named storm in the Atlantic to add on to the total list of storms we've had so far for this hurricane season. And we will also see whether or not, whatever does develop here gets close, potentially, to the Lesser Antilles. And very clearly, if something does get close, it'll probably be a weak storm, given all the dry air and wind shear that is around, and we'll be definitely waiting to choke off whatever does try to develop here. And clearly, the GFS on the 12Z run does show that. So, in terms of major impacts, I wouldn't necessarily worry for the Caribbean islands here, but still keep an eye out on the tropics, as I still think more than likely something will develop here in the MDR in the coming days. And we do have a 60% chance, according to the National Hurricane Center, after all. So the tropics still looking like they will continue to escalate in the Atlantic and more than likely produce something here for the month of August. And you definitely imagine that if this doesn't develop, we're probably going to have more chances as we get on further into August and closer to the peak of the hurricane season, which at this point, at least the start of the peak of the hurricane season, which is August 20th, only 10 days away. So something is bound to happen, but I think something is still very likely to happen here with this wave. Moving on to the Central Pacific, though, this is an area here where I think something is very likely going to happen. We're going to see development more likely than not, probably a much higher chance than the Atlantic right now, although I still think we have a decently high chance of something happening in the Atlantic. But this will especially be, very much something we'll need to watch, because whatever does develop could aim at Hawaii here. And you could see Invest 93C right now in the Central Pacific. And you can see why, though, there's still a little bit of uncertainty, or why the setup right now would have quite a bit of uncertainty, because Invest 93C roughly located somewhere right in here. But the thing is, again, it's kind of embedded within this broad, monsoon trough, kind of associated with the intertropical convergence zone here in the Pacific. So it's kind of spread out right now, and the models are still waiting to see what exactly is going to happen here with 93C and how it's going to develop. But there's definitely quite a bit of convection blowing up right now, and definitely looking like something that is in the makings here. But the models, obviously, given the setup, very uncertain about 93C's future. But one thing that is a general theme in all of the models right now is we generally have a track towards the west-northwest, or initially towards the northwest for the next 2 or 3 days, and then starts to bend back towards the west-northwest and head in the general direction of Hawaii. And then intensity-wise, it could be doing that as a pretty decent storm. Most of the models bring this to at least tropical storm strength. So again, looking very likely at least at a potential system here in the Central Pacific, but there also are a decent number of ensembles showing whatever does happen here to maybe make it to hurricane strength. So we could potentially be looking at a pretty sizable threat to Hawaii within the next week with Invest 93C. Obviously, though, there is still a lot of uncertainty, but going over some of the models again, I want to show you what the GFS does, and you can see the GFS today is on the boat of this potentially being a direct threat to Hawaii. We have a storm here embedded within this very broad mess of the intertropical convergence zone, but gradually it should consolidate. Maybe starting by tomorrow, you start to see a more solid low-level center develop, and then we see something here that actually becomes a bona fide tropical cyclone, and it intensifies enough and then starts heading in a more west-northwestward direction, and the GFS shows this going directly over some of the islands here of Hawaii. So, and this all happens within a span of a week. So definitely, this is roughly what happened around 6 or 7 days from now. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, and we're still going to have to watch and see just exactly how 93C comes together here in the Pacific, because if this consolidates more to the north here, if the energy associated with 93 consolidates more, more to the northeast and ends up on the more northeastern side of the track here, potentially 93C could end up going to the north of the islands of Hawaii, or if something tries to consolidate more towards the south or the western part of this whole monsoon trough, something instead ends up going to the south. So what I'm trying to tell you is there's a lot of uncertainty, lots to be ironed out here, but the GFS, a major global model, definitely something you would pay attention to, right? definitely showing a Hawaii threat, and the euro as well. Taking a look at it over the next few days, and let's actually compare the two, the GFS and the euro. And to be honest with you, at least comparing, the two model runs we have right now for the GFS on the euro, not far off from each other. They both show the storm being in a similar area. Obviously, intensity-wise, things are a little bit different. The European is probably indicating a much weaker storm at this time, while the GFS definitely has a more bona fide storm, but they're in a similar area, and they both head into the general direction of Hawaii. So if you are in the Hawaiian Islands here, we're going to have to start paying attention to Invest 93C much more closely this upcoming week, and maybe we might have an actual threat that could materialize this time, unlike, the last few times where we typically see storms move to the north or to the south, and just, don't verify. And even if this does go slightly to the north or south, I'd still expect that some impacts here are going to happen to Hawaii, but very likely something else that's going to be, an added influence to 93C here, looking at the sea surface temperature anomalies. One of the biggest influences on the Pacific this year, El Nino. Very, very strong El Nino, record-breaking El Nino, literally at this point, developing in the Pacific right now, and obviously something that we've been talking about for some time. Not just the El Nino, but in general, the tropical Pacific here is just incredibly warm. Sea surface temperature anomalies well above normal, and even a lot of that's here is stretching into the general area of Hawaii. So we have warmer than normal sea surface temperatures, meaning, extra fuel. So more than likely, temperatures around the Hawaii area, the actual sea surface temperatures will definitely be at least warm enough for a tropical cyclone to be able to be sustained in the area. So it's not like, whatever does develop here will be, once it gets towards Hawaii, it'll be moving into cooler waters, so it'll weaken, although obviously, the sea surface temperatures near Hawaii are still marginally warm, but, again, El Nino, so favorable atmospheric forcing, very favorable, especially given the kind of magnitude of an El Nino we have right now, and generally warm sea surface temperature anomalies here around Hawaii. Definitely going to make things interesting here over the next few days. So we will be watching Hawaii and the Pacific with the tropics very closely. But the Atlantic too, again, I've also been talking about this, sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic are also very warm, and they've really kind of went up a notch over the last week or so, since the beginning of August as well, and that's also interesting. Not just for whatever could happen out here in the short term, but generally as we get closer and closer towards the peak of the hurricane season, the Atlantic is just warmer, and maybe that could potentially kind of juice things up a little bit more with activity here in the Atlantic, especially the eastern Atlantic, and we see more areas, more, waves try to develop rather than, completely just get choked off by all the dry air that we have in the Atlantic right now. And in general, maybe we might see more activity than what some people are anticipating in the Atlantic right now as we get closer towards the peak of the hurricane season. Obviously not something, not saying that we'll see something outside of what will probably be the limit this year, given the very strong El Nino that we have. But all I will say is that with the current sea surface temperature pattern that has really kind of developed here in the Atlantic over the last week or so, if it weren't for this strong El Nino, I would say that we would probably be having a hyperactive hurricane season in the making. And obviously, again, that's not going to happen this year, given the strong El Nino and the limitations that are there, but it's certainly going to help fuel things to develop here more in the MDR, especially the eastern MDR, more than likely over the next few weeks. And hey, maybe that'll be what gives a boost and still allow for the current wave we are watching in the eastern Atlantic to develop after all, even if there is dry air and shear that it's going to struggle with. But either way, still lots of track here in the tropics over the next few days in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, and we will obviously be keeping a close eye on all of it here. So stay tuned. Lots more coming and we will definitely be monitoring how these waves and these invests pan out, especially for the Pacific, as there is more than likely more of an immediate land threat, so more urgency to watch whatever happens there than the Atlantic. Although maybe down the line, the northern Caribbean islands will have to potentially watch for some impacts if we see changes to the track with whatever does develop with our tropical wave. So again, we will be keeping an eye out on everything here very closely. Although I'm pretty sure you know that by now. So I hope I continue to see you guys here throughout the week. With that being said, that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, and again, if you want more and you want to continue to track the tropics with us here over this upcoming week as things continue to heat up, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so by clicking the subscriber bell, the subscriber button, free, no cost needed, and turn on the notification bell so you can get videos the moment I upload them. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And I will definitely have more for you again tomorrow.